Welcome to the report for day 419 of the war in Ukraine. You are listening to The Account. Thank you for joining me. Today I have updates on Russian President Vladimir Putin's alleged visit to occupied Kherson and Luhansk Oblasts for Easter. All other updates are grouped into the usual: situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, which contains a lot of updates today, and international developments. Before we start the news though, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. Heavy fighting continues as Russia is making small advances inside Bakhmut, especially in the northern parts. Russia claimed to have crossed the railway line and occupied some buildings west of it, but there has been no evidence provided. In the south, the situation remains stable. Avdiivka. Russian units tried to advance into Avdiivka from the southeast but were repelled. Otherwise, there have been several Russian assaults on the settlements around Avdiivka without success. President Volodymyr Zelensky visited the advanced positions of Ukrainian defenders in the frontline city of Avdiivka. During Zelensky's visit to Donetsk Oblast, the commander of the Donetsk Operational Tactical Group informed him of the situation at the front line. A rather lengthy video of President Zelensky's visit to the frontline city of Avdiivka was shared as well today. The footage contains scenes of destroyed buildings, a convoy driving through bombed-out streets past ruins, and finally, President Zelensky's meeting with Ukrainian defenders, during which he listened to reports about the front line and presented soldiers with state awards. And before we start, some breaking news. Germany has delivered a Patriot air defense system and missiles for it to Ukraine. And to start the news segment, the updates on Putin's recent visit to the occupied territories of Ukraine. The Kremlin released a statement that Putin has visited the occupied part of Kherson and Luhansk Oblast. During his trip, he visited the headquarters of the Dnieper Group in occupied Kherson and the headquarters of the Vostok National Guard Force in occupied Luhansk. Putin congratulated the military on Easter at the headquarters of the Dnieper Group, presenting them with a copy of the icon, which, according to the president, belonged to one of the most successful defense ministers of the Russian Empire, a statement said. Vladimir Konstantinov, head of the Crimean parliament, stated at a scientific and political conference dedicated to the 240th anniversary of the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Empire that Putin's visit was of great strategic importance. The Russian news outlet Agentstvo has reported that Russian President Vladimir Putin visited the temporarily occupied territory of Kherson Oblast before Easter and was not far from the border with Crimea. The outlet has drawn attention to the fact that the video of Putin's visit to Ukraine's Kherson Oblast, posted by propaganda media, shows a stele at the entrance to Henichesk from the village of Novo-Oleksivka. Also, in one of the shots, Putin hands the soldiers a copy of an icon that belonged to one of the most successful ministers of defense of the Russian army in the 19th century and says that it's about to be Easter, right? Later, Putin's remark about Easter in the Kremlin's video was edited. In particular, the word will was deleted. RIA Novosti posted a comment by Dmitry Peskov, Putin's press secretary, who claimed that Putin had been in Ukraine on April 17th. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. Russian troops attacked the town of Sloviansk in Donetsk Oblast using S-300 missiles and Shahed drones at night. No casualties were reported. 5 apartment blocks, 7 private houses, a security facility, a healthcare facility, an entertainment center, a business center, and several cars were damaged. Dmytro Lubinets, the Verkhovna Rada representative for human rights, reported on the destruction of Ukrainian heritage by Russia and has called on the international community to hold Russia accountable, as the destruction of cultural heritage sites is a war crime under the 1954 Hague Convention for the protection of cultural property in the event of an armed conflict. Oleksiy Danilov, the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, has stated that Ukraine will launch its counteroffensive when the country is ready, and it is only a matter of time. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. Petro Andriushchenko, the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, released a video showing scenes from occupied Mariupol. Dead dolphins on the beach, a rusty Azov train, destroyed children's rides, historical stairs turned into stones. This is what Russian spring in Mariupol looks like, his statement reads. Journalists working on an investigative reporting project of Radio Liberty found a military facility and a radar station of the Russian military in Crimea. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. As stated in the April report by the International Energy Agency, last month Russia managed to bring its crude oil exports back to pre-war levels. Russian oil exports in March soared to the highest since April 2020 thanks to surging product flows that returned to levels last seen before Russia invaded Ukraine, the report says. It is noted that Russia's revenues from the sale of oil in April increased by $1 billion, reaching $12.7 billion, while still being 43% lower than in the same period last year. According to a report by the KSE Institute as part of the self-sanctions project, about 2,000 foreign companies have submitted applications to withdraw from the Russian market for regulatory approval, but it will take at least 8 years to review their applications. Since recently, every Western company that wants to withdraw from the Russian market and sell its assets must directly contribute to Russia's state budget. Until March, companies leaving Russia could choose between a voluntary contribution to the Russian budget, which amounted to 10% of the sale price, or agree to a deferred payment from the sale for several years. Russia has started to use the CCTV network in Moscow to track conscripts. Conscripts who do not live at their place of registration in Moscow are tracked using the city's video surveillance system, said Maxim Loktev, the chief enlistment officer for the Russian capital. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated during his visit to Brazil that Russia is interested in ending what he calls a conflict in Ukraine as soon as possible. Russia currently has 3 missile carriers on combat duty in the Black Sea, with a total salvo of 16 cruise missiles. Western officials, on the condition of anonymity, reported that due to heavy losses of military equipment since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there has been enough evidence seen that Russia has started to deploy equipment built immediately after World War II. In addition, Russia is also struggling with personnel issues. We've seen 2 quite relatively small training cycles go through Belarus, but out of a force of 150,000 which they claimed were mobilized, we've probably seen maybe 15,000 which have gone for any kind of company-level training, the officials said. The Moscow City Court decided to keep Ivan Gershkovich, a reporter of the Wall Street Journal, in custody on charges of espionage. Russian state media reported that May 9 celebrations to commemorate the Soviet Union's victory against Nazi Germany will not include the Immortal Regiment March this year. The Immortal Regiment March is a mass event throughout Russia where processions of people carry photos of their relatives who perished during World War II. The organizers of the movement, who started it in 2011, have since complained that Russian officials hijacked it for their own political gains. According to the Russian state media, officials are encouraging people to instead put photos of their relatives who were veterans of World War II on social media, clothes, cars, or the website of the movement. Russia is on a spree of promoting pseudo-peacekeeping initiatives across the European Union through its agents of influence, calling for a halt of aid to Ukraine and the need to negotiate a settlement. The Polish anti-war movement was especially active in this regard. Activists from the movement recently announced an anti-war action Together for Peace to be held in Porajov on the border of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Germany on May 1st to 2nd. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. Denmark confirmed that Russian ships have been spotted in the area where the Nord Stream sabotage occurred. According to information, there are 112 photos of Russian ships at the scene of the crime. They were made by the Danish Navy 4 days before the explosions. The Danish Ministry of Defense confirmed the existence of the images, but wants to keep them secret to protect intelligence work. Sabrina Singh, the Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary, stated that within 45 days, the U.S. Department of Defense would provide U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin with the conclusion of the investigation into the leak of information from the Pentagon, and also with recommendations on how to improve the department's policies and procedures related to the protection of classified information. The G7 countries pledged to continue to act as a united front against Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine and recommitted to intensifying sanctions against Moscow. Following talks, the foreign ministers promised that any third party helping Russia to evade and undermine sanctions and supplying weapons to Russia will face consequences. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, after a meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart Andriy Kostin, stated that the U.S. Department of Justice is planning to send a prosecutor to The Hague to help investigate Russian crimes. The White House sharply criticized Brazil after President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said that the United States is encouraging war in Ukraine during a trip to China. In this case, Brazil is parroting Russian and Chinese propaganda without at all looking at the facts, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told reporters. The High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, said that Europe cannot have normal relations with China if Beijing does not use its influence on the Russian Federation to stop the war against Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin may use extreme tactics in response to the expected Ukrainian counteroffensive. Western leaders have started to prepare for the eventuality that Putin will use any tools he has left, including threats of nuclear weapons and cyber attacks. At the G7 summit, British officials said they were expecting Russia to retaliate and must be prepared for extreme tactics as it attempted to hold on to Ukrainian territory, especially since Dmitry Medvedev stated earlier that Moscow was ready for the Ukrainians to hit back, warning that his country would use absolutely any weapon if Kyiv attempted to retake Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014. The UK, however, assumes that the only way to end the Russian war against Ukraine is to deoccupy Crimea. French President Emmanuel Macron is planning to approach China with a plan that he believes could potentially lead to negotiations between Russia and Ukraine this summer. Some of the US M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles have already arrived in Ukraine, Pentagon spokesman Army Major Charlie Dietz confirmed. Yesterday, the Defense Ministry of Ukraine already tweeted out photos of the Bradleys painted in the nation's digital camouflage. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defense. Heavy fighting has continued along the Donbas front line. However, there is a realistic possibility that Russia has reduced troop numbers and is decreasing offensive action around Donetsk city, most likely to divert resources towards the Bakhmut sector. In Bakhmut, Russian MOD and Wagner Group forces continue to make creeping advances. The front line in the town center largely follows the main railway line. Ukraine is generally holding Russia's envelopment from the south along the line of Kherson-Skovo Street, the old main road west out of town. For both sides, the exact sequencing of any major drawdown of their units around Bakhmut has become a critical question, with Ukraine wanting to free up an offensive force while Russia likely aspires to regenerate an operational reserve. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin is seemingly regaining some favor with Russian President Vladimir Putin likely as a result of the Russian conventional military's inability to accomplish the tasks Putin had set for it during the winter offensive in Donbass. The extent of Putin's trust and favor for Prigozhin is unclear at this time, but it is likely that Putin halted the Russian MOD's efforts to avenge Wagner by denying Wagner reinforcements and ammunition. Putin's improving relations with Wagner may also be a symptom of his hesitance to increase mobilization and signal a return to crypto mobilization. An interview with two former Wagner Group fighters on their treatment of Ukrainian children and other civilians and prisoners of war, POWs, further highlights how Wagner has institutionalized systematic brutality as part of its fundamental modus operandi. The extremely graphic atrocities described by Lavrov and Savage underscore a slate of recent reports of Wagner's systematic use of brutality as a method of waging war. The Gulagu.net interview with the two former Wagner fighters provides valuable insights into Wagner's force structure and operational prioritization. The Moscow City Court sentenced Russian opposition activist Vladimir Kara-Murza to 25 years in prison on the charge of high treason for Kara-Murza's criticism of the Kremlin and the war in Ukraine. Chinese Defense Minister Li Shangfu met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on April 16th and pledged to strengthen military exchanges and cooperation between Russia and China. Putin continued efforts to portray Russia as an equal defense partner with China and a Pacific naval power amidst Li's visit. Former Russian officer and ardent nationalist Igor Girkin's newly formed Club of Angry Patriots published its manifesto focused on protecting pro-war factions in the Kremlin from possible sabotage and betrayal. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy, at the cost of heavy losses, continues to wage a war of aggression. The main efforts are focused on conducting offensive operations in the Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka directions. During the day, about 30 enemy attacks were repelled in the specified areas of the front. The fiercest battles are fought for Bakhmut and Marinka. In the Liman direction, the enemy tried to improve the tactical position, conducted unsuccessful offensive actions near the settlement of Dibrova. In the Bakhmut direction, the enemy continues to conduct offensive actions. Heavy fighting continues for the city of Bakhmut. In the Avdiivka direction, the enemy carried out offensive actions in the areas of Stepove, Berdichi, Avdiivka, Siverne and Nevelske of the Donetsk Oblast without success. In the Marinka direction, during the day, our defenders repelled numerous enemy attacks in the area of the Marinka settlement.